President Woodrow Wilson. August 6, 1856, in the city of Staunton, Virginia, Thomas Wilson was born. His father was Reverend Joseph Ruggles Wilson. His mother was Janet Jessie Woodrow Wilson. Wilson's father was a pastor in the Church of Staunton. In 1858, Wilson and his family moved to Georgia due to his father taking another job pastoring another church. Then, in his youth, Wilson moved to South Carolina. His father encouraged him to search in the dictionary for foreign words and to quickly use them. His father showed him how to compose and precisely articulate his meaning. This talent with words contributed to making Wilson. Wilson was the president of the. In the year 18 began college at Davidson College in North Carolina. He was able to go to Princeton, where he learned the art of public speaking, and he became involved with the debating society. From Princeton in the year 1879. Soon after, he began going to the University of Law, but he felt he would never decided to continue his education. He began in political science at Johns Hopkins University, majoring in philosophy. Wilson began a career as an educator professor of history at Mower College in 1885. The same year, he then decided to work at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut as a professor of history and political economy in 1888. A few years later, in 1890, he decided to Princeton, this time as a professor of jurisprudence and political economy. In 1902, he became the president of the Princeton University. During this time as president of Princeton, he launched many reforms and organized courses. As governor of New Jersey, he displayed his freedom and his desires to get tasks done. Like an event that occurred while he was president of Princeton, similar hardships. A party of political bosses thought that they were going to be able to use Wilson for their gain, badly mistaken, around the party and went straight to the electorate for his program support. Pushed in a Public Utilities Management Act, a crooked government activity, a Workers' Act, and a direct primary act, all in a little. In the book The Moralist by Patricia, the author talks about how President Wilson was a first-time president. He was the first to have a doctorate. He was the first to have news conferences. He was the first to name a Jewish judge to the Supreme Court. He also noticed several notable stones, such as the implementations of tax and the establishment of the Federal Reserve. Chronic president in the 20th century, besides Franklin D. Roosevelt, did more according to a tool. In 1913, President Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated. President Wilson said it was his responsibility to repair, rethink, and correct the bad without hurting the good that was being done. In October of 1913, the Underwood-Simmons Tariff Act was signed. This directly lowered rates imposed prior Republicans' regimen. President Wilson came to tariffs. He started gathering his thoughts at a young age about tariffs. President, all protective tariffs should be repealed, and the only tariffs aimed is one for revenue only. In October 1940, signed the Clayton Antitrust Act. He pushed for stronger antitrust regulations. He claimed that bigness is not incorrect, rather that it was the wrong thing to remedy the propensity of large companies to exercise monopolies. These guidelines were not activated by organization, but rather by the administrative men in the business. The Federal Trade Commission, with the authority to ban unjust market practices, was established. The Clayton to improve the Sherman Antitrust Act. It specified which the Commission was authorized to ban. It held corporate responsible for the of such companies, removed trade tax, and banned the use of labor injunctions, except for the defense of property, were applicable. Before housing and workplace standards, the ocean and lake sailing mandated by the La Follette-Seaman's Bill. For railroading, Adamson Act created an 8-hour workday. The banking systems of the Federal Reserve were created and committee was reformed to oversee the system. Loans were put under federal guidelines for the same time in American history. 12 farm loan banks were established by the Federal Farm offer farmers and tenants inexpensive and quick, becoming extremely close. It seemed nearly impossible for the Democrat. President Wilson began to contemplate the decision to resign. The plan was that if President will resign, the Vice President will resign as well after they made Hughes Secretary of State. This would make Hughes afraid that he would not have the power to lead the country in the 4 months of transition. President would be his duty to let Hughes become president. This was next. President Wilson won his second term. Began in 1914. President Wilson insisted for the U.S. to be impartial, but not many Americans were willing to be unbiased. The president would avoid going to war for 2 years. President Wilson worked to put an end to the war using active mediation. The Germans had other ideas of submarine warfare. Out of the war for 2 years, President Wilson said this was a war to end wars. In the address on War Aims and Peace Terms on January 1818, the President's motto for world peace to be utilized during World War I for peace talks. In the address, termination of clandestine alliances, a decline of weapons and equipment, and alterations of territorial rights in the interests of both indigenous people and colonists, and the independence of the seas, Wilson answered specifically what he viewed as the trigger of World War I. Wilson has created plans that in the future would guarantee world peace. For starters, he suggested eliminating economic obstacles among nations to manage community self-determination, and a world body that would supply all nations with a structure of mutual protection. The 14 points of Wilson is intended to weaken the desire of the Central Powers to proceed and to include for the Allies. Of 1918, the war came to a close, and in the wake of the congressional election, the German peace plans can restore authority to each chambers. The president called to adopt his policies. The party was crushed, nevertheless, and he was no longer capable of leading Congress with a Republican majority in power. President Wilson went to the peace conference in Paris on December 13th, and the conference was full of arguing. The peace that was in 1919 had quite a bit of Wilson's ideas. Wilson's health was declining. He first had a professor at Princeton in 1896, which caused him to become weak in his right arm, along with numbness in his fingers and pain in his right arm. Wilson learned on the other hand due to not being able to use it for months. In 1906, he began suffering from another stroke that was more serious. This one nearly impaired his left eye. Again in 1913, he had another stroke, but this one hurt his left arm. President Wilson was advised to take it slow, but he was stubborn and headstrong. In 1919, against advice, President Wilson went on a tour to speak publicly, but he collapsed in Colorado, and soon after he stroked. President Wilson retired from 1921. He and his second wife moved to a quiet home in Washington, D.C. President Wilson died on February 3, 1924, and he was laid to the Cathedral of St. Paul's.